What if I told you that the man we're talking to today went from being told he never would amount to anything to retiring his parents, moving his family to the dream home, and creating a life of freedom, all by getting serious about financial education?
And the best part, he's not a financial guru or some startup millionaire. He's the average guy who decided to stop living from paycheck to paycheck and started building legacy wealth. I'm Vita,
I'm Natty.
and we're here to thrive.
Welcome to Thrive by the Rising Muse, the podcast where we talk real life transformation, mental health, purpose, and everything in between.
Today's guest is someone who embodies what Thrive is all about. Robert Ralston was told his learning disabilities and mental health struggles would hold him back. But instead, he built a thriving property business, retired his parents. Oh, you are wonderful. And gave his family a life most people only dream about. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Thank you very much, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Rob, let's rewind. What messages did you grow up hearing about concerning your potential and concerning your success?
Well, I guess going back all the way to the beginning, I suppose, I was very lucky. I come from a house with two very supportive parents. And going back a little further than that, I suppose, shaped the journey that the trajectory that I was on. So if I took my grandparents on my dad's side, my grandfather, worked all his days for the same company, and then just as he was primed for retirement, the company got into difficulty and they raided the pension fund and ended up the company was liquidated and he was left with very little at all. So he had to kind of come in with my dad to kind of rescue that situation. And my dad then, seeing that, said, you know what, that's never going to happen to me. I'm going to be the master of my own destiny. And he went down the business owner route and the kind of entrepreneur route where he wanted to kind of have a hold on the reins. And so I was very lucky, we never really wanted for anything growing up. But that was all down to his hard work, and he was constantly busy and constantly working, constantly providing. And because of that, he had turned around to me growing up and said, what you need to do is get a professional job, study hard, get to university, get a degree, and then you'll always kind of have that in the background. So that was what I was kind of brought up doing. I'm a bang average guy, to be honest. Learning disability wise, I've got dyslexia, but that wasn't diagnosed until after high school. So I kind of always was sort of an average kind of C student working my way through. And I remember I was quite sporty. So what I wanted to do is to be a physiotherapist or a physical therapist. And I was told by the careers guidance people that I wouldn't get the grades to get in. And at the time, I kind of had a bit of a chip on my shoulder about that, I suppose. So I locked myself away for about a year, just studying. And my version of studying was basically just memorizing textbooks. So, which is not exactly how you should be studying necessarily, but it was what I did. So I got into exams and I just regurgitated textbooks. I found the things that were going to come up and just learned them by heart. And then I would say within 2 months of the exams being finished, I'd forgotten it all. So it wasn't very effective. But what it did do was it got me into university doing what I wanted to do. So, at that time I was following the map. I was doing everything that I was supposed to be doing, everything that you're told that you're supposed to be doing. Got into university, then I got the degree, and that was all great. And then got my first job, which was super. So, I was living the life. I was, doing everything, making the family proud, all the things that you're supposed to do. And then I remember landing my first paycheck and I opened it up and I was all excited and it hit me like a ton of bricks and I was like, that can't be right. I was like, there's no way there's no way you do all the stuff you're supposed to do. You know, you're a good boy at school, you work hard, you get to university, and then that's all I'm earning in a month. That can't be right.
Mm-hmm.
And for this first 6 months of my job, I remember surviving on baked beans and scrambled eggs for the last week of every month, waiting for my paycheck to drop. And
Mm-hmm.
I just got really disenchanted, and it was like there has to be more to life than this. And so that sort of discontent, I suppose, was what sort of led me to break away from the kind of rat race, I suppose, if you want to call it that, to kind of explore how I would be able to, provide for my future family, or what is now my current family, and see
Mm-hmm.
how I could kind of change my stars, which is how
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of led me to here. So I suppose ultimately my upbringing is privileged from the point of view I've got a very supportive family. So
Mm-hmm.
both my parents still kicking around, support me, and both my sisters never wanted for anything. As an individual, I'm not the smartest guy by any manner of means, but I've kind of cracked the code, and in doing so, have managed to create security and affluence for myself, support my family, and we can touch on all those things as well. Because my belief is now, that the average person can achieve affluence. You don't
Mm-hmm.
need to be anybody special. You don't need to do anything special. You just need to know the rules of the game and implement them. And that's what I'm here to do now. I'm here to spread that message and to help other people to get to where I am, to break free of the 9 to 5, to climb the ladder and escape poverty, and make sure that they have a life of financial security and can provide for themselves and their kids.
What were some of the first lessons you taught yourself to manage money differently?
Well, it's a funny story actually. So, like I said, I was working away doing the 9 to 5 that everyone does,
Mm-hmm.
and after about 2 years, like I said, I was pretty browned off. So I had been at that time saving for a mortgage as well. So I was scrounging because I wasn't on massive money. I was pretty average wage, and I just got so annoyed that I just said, you know what, there has to be more to life than this, and I took all that savings and I decided I'm leaving and going to Thailand. So I just went traveling on the beaches for ages. And I remember sitting on a beach in Thailand and being very aware that like this was brilliant, but the money was going to run out at some point. So what was I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was going through Bangkok airport actually, and I just wandered into a bookstore to see what am I going to read on the next beach that I stumble onto, and I discovered a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad, which I think is probably what starts about 95% of entrepreneurs and uh, financial evangelists and people like me on their journey. And I guess that was what opened my eyes to financial literacy and to personal finance. And the main lessons that I took from that, I read it cover to cover in a day, and then I read it again in the second day. And from there, I just started to deep dive everything on personal finance that I could find. So I picked up a lot of lessons just from reading and from books, and then other lessons I've picked up along the way just by attaching myself to people in the industry. But the main lessons I suppose that I've picked up that were eye opening was understanding the difference between assets and liabilities,
Mm-hmm.
understanding inflation and its impact on the economy and its impact on your money in your pocket, and even more importantly,
Mm-hmm.
your money in your bank account, and
Mm-hmm.
how everyone's taught to save. But if you're making 1 to 2% interest rate in your savings account and inflation's at 10%, your money's worth 8% less year on year.
Nothing.
But nobody really
Right.
understands that. It's not something that's taught in schools.
Right.
And yeah, the other thing then, a big eye opener is understanding the importance of compounding and compound interest over time. Those three principles are massive. They're foundational, and that is definitely what you can build your family's wealth upon. They're not
Can you
crazy.
define liability? Go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, no, I was gonna say that they're not crazy sexy, but if you follow them,
Right.
then that's what
Right.
creates it in the long term.
Now, for some of us who, even though we went to school, math was not our best subject,
Me neither.
especially economy. If I tell you my experience with my economy class, I will mess my reputation. I
Yeah,
slept through the class.
that's
It
hey. I dropped
was
business when I was
boring.
14 years old. Yeah.
Mhm.
It was boring. It was right. It was in a classroom that had no air conditioning, and it was the middle of summer.
Hmm.
I fell asleep. There you go.
Yeah.
And so, can you define assets and liabilities?
Yeah, yeah, very much so. I guess
Mm-hmm.
the simplest way to put it is if you understand that an asset is something that you buy that puts money into your pocket, and a
Okay.
liability is something that you buy that takes money out of your pocket. So,
Okay.
for example, you can buy a property,
Uh-huh.
and if you rent it out and it generates cash flow, so every month there's excess money that's dropping into your bank account and then your bank balance
That's an
builds
asset.
up, that's an asset.
Yeah.
But if you buy a property that's a holiday home that sits vacant and you use it occasionally, but you still have to pay the mortgage on it and it's costing you money every
Right.
month, that's a liability. So
That makes
it's the
sense.
same thing that you've bought, but it's how it's used
Mm-hmm.
is what creates it. It creates the difference between the asset and the liability. So
Mm-hmm.
that principle is across anything, because you can buy a car and that
Mm-hmm.
car depreciates over time as soon as you drive it off the lot. And if you're
Mhm.
driving it just to kind of, service your lifestyle, then it's a liability. But if you're an Uber driver and it's your livelihood, it's an
Mm.
asset because it's putting money in your pocket. So it's
Right.
understanding the difference between the two. Um, a lot of people think that their home is an asset. And this is a
Mm-hmm.
controversial topic because for a lot of people, it's the biggest investment that they make,
Mm-hmm.
um, unless they listen to me. Um, and although property will go up over time,
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't consider it an asset because it's costing you money. It's not generating
Mm.
additional cash unless
Mm-hmm.
you do something like you have a proportion of your home or you have an annex or something that you can then rent out, and the rent from that say covers your mortgage. And so again, you can play around with these things to create an asset from whatever it is that
Mm-hmm.
you've bought. But yeah, so that the fundamental difference between an asset and liability is where does the cash flow go? Does the cash flow
Mm-hmm.
leave your account or does it come into your account?
That's makes sense.
If somebody's trying to start a business and it's not necessarily in real estate like yours is,
Mhm.
what would be the first time you think they should do?
Well, when I started out, like I said, I'd literally blown all of my cash in Thailand. I
Mm-hmm.
came back, and I had nothing to start with. All I knew is that I was going to build an asset base and I was going to pursue passive income and financial independence. So I came back and
Mm.
I got a 9 to 5 job, and immediately I started to network with people who were in the industry that I wanted to start off in, which was property at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So the number one thing that people should be doing when they're starting out is attach yourself to people who are a couple of steps ahead of where you are, and stick to them like glue and pummel them with questions and ask and absorb as much information from them as you can. How I started was doing exactly that. I went to network meetings. I started to find out what made these people tick, how they were running their businesses, and then in order to generate income for myself, I started just doing little side hustles for them and doing what we call over here property sourcing. I think
Mm-hmm.
over in the states with you guys, it gets called wholesaling. I think it's called, but basically
Okay.
you're finding the deals, you're finding the opportunities, and then you
Mm-hmm.
approach investors and you sell that opportunity for a finder's fee. So you collect these little fees and you put them away, collect the little fees, put them away. And I'm a big advocate of saying that I never save money, I store money. And that's
Mhm.
a mental difference where I'm like, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saving money for a rainy day in case, you know, the furnace goes or the boiler
Mm-hmm.
breaks or the roof needs repaired. I'm storing money so that I can then put it into an asset class that's going to generate
Mm-hmm.
income. And the income from that asset class will trickle in passively every month. And so that income then takes care of if the boiler breaks or if the roof needs something or the windows get broken or whatever. So the number one thing is that if you're starting from scratch is attach yourself to a mentor. It doesn't have to be someone who's officially a mentor, somebody who just
Right.
you are aware they're sitting where you want to be, and absorb as much information as you can from them. We kind of built our way along that ladder then. So we went from the finder's fee situation to then starting project management, where we would manage the trades and oversee the refurbs and getting extra fees for there, to the point where we are now, where we have enough experience that we deal with investors on a fixed term loan basis, where they'll give capital across to us and we'll basically accrue the assets, and we pay them back fixed returns. So they're then getting passive income that drips in. We get to accumulate an asset, and everybody wins because we get the passive income from the rent, they get the passive income from fixed returns. So that's paying for their family holiday. That's, paying for them in retirement or addition to their pension, or what it is. There's various different reasons that people want to invest, but what it is allows them to sit on a beach somewhere or in an armchair, or focus on what their main business is. Deal with a lot of busy professionals who are a bit like my dad was, so focused on the hustle of generating a wage that they're too busy to either learn how to invest, or just too busy to take themselves away from their business. So we're able to create secondary income streams for them without them having to do anything.
That sounds like a dream.
Rob, what were some of the earliest wins and the earliest flops you experienced, and how did it shape your business mind?
Well, you know what? There's ups and downs in any business. I think the earliest win for me was probably about 6 months after I had been going to network meetings, and I'd been trying to kind of find my feet and get started, and I was looking at opportunities and I was looking at deals, and I was trying to find one that I could pass on to an investor for a fee. And I was doing that for about 6 months without any success at all, because I was brand new. I probably didn't know very much about what I was doing, and I was slowly learning my way. And I remember about 6 months in, I finally got one over the line, and I saw the fees drop into my bank account, and it was £1,000 at the time. And I remember I just hit the roof. I was beyond thrilled with myself. I was like, you know what, this can actually work. And it was that moment that it was what we would call proof of concept. It showed me that it's there to be done, it's there to be won. I've done it, I can replicate it, and now that's the first step on the ladder, and I can build my way up from there. Property is a funny game when you're dealing with rentals, because you're dealing with tenants and people's lives. So it's very important, obviously, that you're responsible about how you're doing, what you're doing in terms of providing somewhere a safe haven for families to live in. But the flip side of that is that you also have to deal with sometimes when you have tenants who aren't as respectful of your properties as maybe you would like them to be. So I guess if we're talking about low points, there was an incident where I had a lovely couple in one of my flats, and then I got a call one day from the letting agent to say that there'd been a big breakdown and there'd been a big fight, and there'd been an incident of domestic abuse, and the guy had legged it. He'd run away, and he'd left Scotland and was down in England, and the police were looking for him, and they were obviously then going to move out, but the door had been broken in by the police, and there was holes in the wall from things being thrown, and so it was a bit of a mess. But I guess the main message within that is you have to be resilient. You have to have a stick to itiveness where this too shall pass. There's never going to be a series of good days without a bad day at the end of it. You have to just ride those waves, and you have to take it on the chin. And rather than focusing on the problem, you focus on, okay, how do I fix it? How do I get out the far side of it? Because if you just dwell on it, then nothing changes, nothing happens. There's a saying that I really like where, you know, not everything that happens is your fault, but everything that
Mm-hmm.
happens is your responsibility.
Yep.
So that's basically how I kind of approach those things. So it's not my fault that somebody has wrecked the flat, but it's my responsibility to put it back together so that it will
Mhm.
continue to generate income and it'll continue to support my business.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just going to put my
How did
laptop
you
on charge there if you
right?
bear with me 2 seconds. Sorry, I'm just about my laptop's being
Sure.
2 seconds.
Sure.
Let me stop it.
So when you start a business and you were all in, even though you were doing the little side jobs, did you already have a family?
No, not at that point. So
Okay.
I was just married, but we
Okay.
hadn't
So
any
you
kids
did.
yet.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, but you were
yeah, no, so
responsible for the wife.
yeah, that's it, that's it. So the first property that we got as part of our portfolio was about 3 years into when we'd been doing all the various different other jobs just to kind of collect the fees. So the first property that I got was Valentine's Day. I remember that. It was Valentine's Day, which was a month before my first son was born.
Oh.
So it had just ticked in before the family started to arrive, and both the portfolio and the family have proceeded to continue to grow.
Well, now that you know you have your family, you have retired your parents, how do you manage risk in the middle of all these responsibilities?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think my risk tolerance is probably higher than my wife's is. She would be a little bit more conservative in terms of risk than I would be. But ultimately, that as a partnership needs to be a conversation because everybody needs to be happy in terms of
Mm-hmm.
that so-called risk. In business, there is always going to be risks. You know, it's a risk
Mm-hmm.
to buy a flat because although you can have all the surveys in the world, you might find something. You know, there might be wet rot in the floorboards that wasn't picked up or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. There's always going to be risks. But again, the
Mm-hmm.
principle is what do you do to mitigate those things? So you put in place as much as you can to try and minimize or mitigate the risks or the potential risks. And in doing so, you can, minimize your exposure. But ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
if the excrement hits the fan when,
Yeah, I got you.
as it sometimes does, well, you can be sure that it will at some point. It goes back to how do you manage those situations. So I don't think there's any risk to my business that I could not work my way through.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's the age old saying of if you stand if you stand outside long enough, you're going to get wet because it's eventually going to rain. So
Mm-hmm.
you just buy an umbrella. You have to have so yeah. So there's various things that you can do. So we keep aside a contingency fund.
Mm-hmm.
So if something goes wrong, there's extra budget there to fix it. We make sure that when we're running the numbers on refurbishments, that we're always very conservative and we'll have contingency funds again in any refurbs that we're doing to make sure that if we go over budget, it's not a problem. We have various exit strategies thought out. So if I have a property that I buy and my goal is to hold it and rent it out in the long term, if for any reason that doesn't pan out or an investor needs to get their cash back quicker, we can then use a different exit strategy. We'll just sell that. We can flip it. We can change it and make it into a service accommodation, Airbnb style thing. There's
Mm-hmm.
loads of different things that you can do, but you need to be aware of different exit strategies so that you have the ability to pivot if you need to, if something crops up and something changes. And the other thing is that it's economies of scale. So as we get bigger, the rental cash flow accumulates, and this goes back to one of the earlier points that I made about compounding over time. So the cash flow from one flat is small. So if the roof needs repaired there, I'm much more exposed. But if I have 10 flats, it's very unlikely that 10 roofs are going to need to be repaired all at once.
Right.
But there's the rental income coming in from 10 flats. So I'm much more secure in that I can handle any cash flow issues, or like if somebody moves
Right.
out, then I can cover those void periods because I've got the cash flow coming in from elsewhere. If I get a down valuation for whatever reason because a surveyor gets out of the bed on the wrong side one day, I can handle that because I can absorb that. And ultimately, investing is a long-term play. So do I think that a house that I buy today is going to be worth less in 30 years? No, I don't. So, even if I get a down valuation today, I just sit on it. I'll put a tenant into it, and then I'll get another valuation in 2 years' time. Yeah.
So, what does success mean to you today
Well,
in the
I think
life
again,
that you built?
yeah, so again, this is a great question because success is different for everybody. I'm not a flashy dude. I've no interest in cars really. I couldn't really tell you the difference between a Ford Focus and Volvo, aside from the fact that they got different badges. So I'm not a big material guy. My goals have always been lifestyle orientated. I wanted security for my family. I wanted security for my kids. I wanted my kids to have the opportunity to live in the countryside with a bit of space away from the city. I wanted them to have fresh air. If they wanted animals, I wanted to have the opportunity to give them that. So my wealth vision, if you want to call it that, has always been having to spend with my family because that's what matters. So I don't want to have somebody dictate to me that I need to show up at a certain time to do a certain thing, to only be allowed to have a certain amount of holidays. I want to be able to say, actually, you know what, I'm going to take today because I want to spend it with the family because the sun's out and the beach is calling. I want to be able to give them the opportunity that, I can get behind them if they want, I don't know, piano lessons or drum lessons, then I can facilitate that. I want to be in a position that if my wife, who still works because she's very vocational, loves her job, but if she wants to step back her hours, then that's fine because we're supported. If I want to retire early and, I have income that means it'll make money when I'm asleep. That's the goal. I want security. I want not to have to worry about money, and I want to be able to then spend time doing the things that matter.
You talk about retiring your parents and that they were very focused on the hustle, especially your dad.
Mm.
How was that process of getting him out of the mentality of, and let me backtrack. Did the retirement process was putting them in a position like yours where they had passive income and that how they could retire?
The biggest thing in terms of that is, I think my dad and my mum are both busy by nature. I don't think they would ever sit down because they like to be busy. They like to be doing things. So the ethos of retiring them is really just to, a bit like I'm talking about. It's, I'll probably never
Doing what
necessarily
they want to
retire.
do.
I do what I want to do. But it's to take away the pressure of, you have to do this or the bills don't get paid. That's what retirement is to me. So it's the ability to put things in place where living costs are taken care of, and if he wants to go and drive an Uber or something because he wants to have the chats with the people they take, because he's a very social animal, then he's free to do it. And if he doesn't want to do it today, then he's okay to sit down and watch the game. That's fine too. It's removal of pressure. I think that this is the thing about passive income, is that it doesn't matter if you're tired or if you're sick or if you're asleep, the money trickles in. So it's security, it's constant, and it's asset based. So you're not exchanging your time for money, which is what everybody does when they have to pitch up to work for their 9 to 5. You get paid for working from 9 to 5, and as soon as you go home, you stop earning because you're not on the treadmill spinning hours, rattling the keyboard. Whereas your passive income, it doesn't matter if you're in Spain, it doesn't matter if you're in Miami, it doesn't matter if you're on the North Pole, it still trickles in. So it's the time that it gives you. And for me, that's time at the moment, but for them, that's time in their retirement.
Absolutely.
How do you and your wife work together with decisions or work, parenting, money?
It's like any partnership. Everything's on an even keel. Everything's discussed openly, and I think that's the only way to function. To be honest with you, I don't think you can get by if there's not an open, honest communication. So in any facet of life, whether that's, goals or aspirations that are individual, or whether it's the kids, or whether it's work, or whatever it happens to be, there's always a kind of a sit down and we'll talk things out. What is it that she's looking to achieve? What is it that I'm looking to achieve? And I am very, very lucky. I love my wife to bits. She's my best friend and I'm hers. And we do have a very close understanding of, we will always back each other up. And that is, the most important thing in life, I think. But it doesn't matter if I could come away with some complete outlandish goal, but if it's important to me, she'll say, you know what, let's work through this. Let's hear this out. What does this mean, and how can we make this work? And likewise with her. She wanted to go on an ice hockey camp a couple of weeks ago, so I was like, yeah, okay, that's fine. I'll take the kids. You shoot away down to England and go do your ice hockey camp. I wanted to. It's a bit of a midlife crisis thing. Wanted to take up bodybuilding and men's physique, and she was like, yeah, I'll run the diet side of stuff, and you go to gym. And I was like, cool. So it's give and take. It's understanding, but it's openness and honesty as well. So it's all those things. I don't think you can pinpoint any one thing that makes it a success. I think it needs to be a mixture of all these things. I'm sure that everybody within the realm of our voices would like to have some passive income. I think that's the dream for anybody. But we also have to think about the fact that we are not exactly where you were when we about to start. For example, you were a little younger, you didn't have a responsibility of a family. Yes, you were broke, but if you had to spend 16 hours on a side job to do something, you had the ability to. What would you say to someone who's already probably in debt with a family and responsibilities, but who also wants to start a business that could get them to the point of being in a better position? I would say start and start now, because you're right in terms of the younger that you start, the longer that you have to put money aside and to build, and that principle of compounding takes flight. It's Warren Buffett is the richest man in the world, but he has made something like three times his net worth in the last 3 years, just based off the fact that he's been in the game for a long time. So, my belief is that anybody can become a millionaire so long as they're able to work. It's just a case of having the right framework and working the systems. And yes, it is a little bit harder if you have debt, if you have the additional expenses of supporting a family, if you are supporting, other members of your family who aren't able to work, or for, there's any number of things that can be perceived as an obstacle. I guess the key message there is that, again, it's not your fault that life has dealt you a difficult hand, but it is your responsibility to play the hand that you're dealt and to maximize what you can do for yourself and for your family, because there are unfortunately no handouts. So if not you, then who? If you don't take that forward, then nobody's going to better your life for you. So my message there would be that it's never too late to start, but what you need to do is you do need to work hard, but not just work hard on a 9 to 5 job. You need to work hard at attaining assets. Or if you're not doing it yourself, if you're focusing on earning an income, link with somebody like myself or somebody else who's able to facilitate that for you, who can either build it for you or who can work in a joint partnership where we facilitate it, or they facilitate it for you. So there are avenues for anyone to accumulate wealth, as long as you're able to work and earn some sort of an income. It doesn't matter if you are a waitress in a cafe, or if you're a pilot, or if you're a doctor. It doesn't matter. It's the principles of you earn a certain amount, you live below your means, you put a certain amount aside, but you don't save it. You immediately put it into something that's going to generate money in. And it might be that you're only starting off with a small amount, but you put that small amount into something that's going to pay you back more money. And whilst that's working, you continue to do that same principle. And what happens is it starts off really small, but if you stay consistent with it, that small amount becomes a little bigger and becomes a little bigger, becomes a little bigger. It's the same principle of eating an elephant. You only do it one bite at a time. Yeah.
And I like
But you have to
especially the
start
one
eating. If you don't start eating, you're never going to get there.
you have to start biting. The whole living below your means, because sometimes people want to have they have big dreams but not willing to do the sacrifice.
They have steak dreams.
Yeah, but it's and that's a good one. It's not a baloney budget. It's a baloney means that you're using money that you could be investing in your future in a business, but you're using it to go out to dinner, buy fancy clothes, buy fancy shoes. You could probably cook something at home and save those $20 or $30 and put it to the side to either get rid of debt or to put it towards the principle of starting a business. But you can live it up before you have it.
It's again, it goes back to the fundamental principles of wealth. It's understanding the difference between assets and liabilities. It's understanding delayed gratification. It's understanding that if you buy a Lamborghini, you don't just buy a Lamborghini, you buy Lamborghini problems. You buy, it costs you 2.5 grand to change a tire on a Lamborghini, costs you 200 quid to change it on a Volvo. And who are you doing it for? You
Right.
have to think about where you are, and everyone's at a different point. But even small changes consistently add up very quickly, and people underestimate what they can do in 10 years and overestimate what they can do in a year. So you need to be patient, and you're probably not going to have saved or stored enough money to change your life in a year. But if you continue to do it for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, it adds up very quickly. And over that time, as long as you're investing sensibly or putting your money into assets, you're going to then have continuous building, trickling of cash flow coming back in that you can then reinvest. One of the things that, again, talking about sort of living below your means, you don't have to live a squalid life. You can be comfortable.
No.
You just have to be sensible. And
Or
ultimately,
be creative.
yeah, be creative and just be sensible. It's you then save 10% and you put that away, and then that 10% becomes 15% because it generates an extra 5, and that 15% then becomes 22% because it constantly spirals upwards. It's that kind of hockey stick effect where it starts off slow and then you hit a little up curve, and then that up curve very quickly starts to kind of fly up. But you have to start, and if you don't start, then you never get to that curve, to that uplift. One of the things as well is when it comes to buying fancy things, or when it comes to going for fancy dinners, those things are okay, but you have to know where the cash is coming from. If you decide that you want to go for a fancy dinner or you want to buy a nice car, buy an asset first that pays for your fancy dinner or pays for your car. Instead of slapping loads of money down on a car finance plan, slap money down on a flat, buy a flat, wait a year, let the cash flow come in, and then let that flat take over your car payments. And then the flat has bought you your car, you get the fancy car. But once the car's paid off, you now have the car which is depreciated in value, but you still have the flat which has now gone up in value and cash flows every month.
Money, right?
It's just being
pay for those service and the tire coming after it too.
That's exactly it. You don't have Lamborghini problems, you have a house.
Yes.
But it's the principles of that, and these aren't things that are taught in school. So it's one of the things that in the next year, I've already reached out to a couple of different schools locally about going around and talking to pupils about this, because you're right in what you said earlier. The earlier that you start, the better the chance that you have. And I think if you speak to a lot of wealthy people about money and about financial literacy and about the kind of knowledge of money and how it works, is everybody wishes that they knew about it before they did. They wish they knew. They wish they found out about it earlier. So one of the things that I want to do is that I know that property and investing has changed my life, and if it can work for me, who's a bang average guy, then it can work for absolutely everybody else. They just need to know the tools and how to use them. So that's my sort of project alongside my business, is to try and kind of spread that word and to give people the tools that they can start changing their lives as well, and to try get that to them as early as we can.
Now, I know people who buy properties that are behind in their taxes, okay, and go pay the taxes. I think after you pay for 5 years or whatever, then the property can be put in your name. And through them doing this, they have accumulated a nice bit of different properties. Yeah. Yeah, the other one is get properties in foreclosure. Yeah, properties in foreclosure. And in fact, that's how they got their home. It was in foreclosure, I think. And they got it for a lower price. Which is great. But yeah, behind in taxes on property and foreclosure properties. They have really, really been successful in that area. Yeah, yeah.
There's different strategies for yeah. There's 101 different reasons why you can find a quote unquote deal in property. Ultimately, what everybody needs to understand is, I mean, if we're talking about property and real estate, is that you're actually not really so much looking at the property itself, you're looking at the people behind the property, because every house has a story, and there'll be a reason that that person can't get whatever the maximum value would be on the open market, say, or if they could, then they would just go and do that. They're in a conversation with you to sell it at a lower price because there's a problem. And as an investor looking to accumulate an asset base, your main job is to solve that problem. So that problem could be that something's happened and they can no longer make the mortgage payments and the bank is going to foreclose, and the bank is basically just going to strip that house away and they'll be left with nothing. But if they have the chance to sell it to you quickly before the bank can do that, they can sell it to you for more than what the bank is going to take it for, so they can pay off the bank loan. They get a little bit of something that they can then go and start again. So you've solved that problem, but you've managed to take away the issue that they had. You might find that somebody has become really unwell, or they might be particularly elderly and they've not been able to they've not been able to look after the house. So the house is, become really depreciated. It's become really run down. There's issues with the plumbing. It's not been maintained. So you can't put that on, the open market, because the estate agent comes around and the photos have, the brown soiled wallpaper and, the cat litter scattered across the, whatever happens to be, there's, graffiti on the outside of the house, whatever happens to be.
Yeah.
But you have to look past those things, because although that would put the majority of people off, that's just because they don't want to deal with those problems. Your job is to deal with those problems, see the opportunity, and then turn what is now a property that can't really be used into a nice, safe house for people who need it. So it's about, a lot of it is to do with your mindset. It's to do with how you view a problem and how you find the solution and how you can help people. Because, I might be speaking to somebody who they've got a problem with a house, and it's not necessarily that they'll want to sell it to me. They want to maximize the value, and that might not be for me. But I'd be like, you know what? Your house has been sat on the market for 6 months. It's not shifting. I'll point you in the direction of someone who can help you. So even if it's not to me, I can then, send it to someone who can help. It's all about relationships. It's about dealing with the people behind the property. And I think if you're open and honest with people, they'll buy into that. And that's where opportunity comes, is because it's actually, you're dealing with the people rather than the property. The property is the assets that sits behind it all. But what you're talking about with foreclosures or property taxes, that's, a whole myriad of things. I think, there's any number of reasons that people can want to get rid of a property quickly. Divorce is a massive issue. People have properties in joint names. There's a whole host of reasons, and that's why you not. It's not just about accumulating assets for yourself. It's about having the compassion to listen to the people and the problem and solve that. And in doing so, you are improving their life because you're fixing the problem. You're improving your own life because you're then creating an asset base that helps to support your family. And from an investor perspective, the investors that we deal with, we're then able to create a solid asset base. We've got built-in equity because we've bought it at a level where we know there's going to be an uplift. They're securing their investment and we can pay them back a fixed return, which means they have then added a passive income stream to their net worth, where they're busy working away and we have this happening over here, which is going to ultimately pay them every year. So it's
You
this kind of.
talked about starting. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so you're fixing this problem, you're fixing this problem, you're fixing that
Mhm.
problem. So it's very much a kind of a domino effect.
You talked about that you've been in conversations with schools to start doing financial literacy. Given the fact that, no secret you're in the UK, but that these principles are not necessarily, they're not just for the UK, the
Yeah.
universal principles. Have
Hmm.
you thought of doing sharing those things online, like doing a course or a webinar or something to that effect?
Well, one of the things that we're looking at doing, or I'm looking at doing at the moment, is I've got the sort of pipeline put together, or the, what is the word, the concept together for a book, which we're probably going to be publishing towards the latter end of this year. And that will be based off the same kind of principles that I'm talking about here, but the same things that I would be talking to students about. And that is, like you say, the principles of wealth building, the principles of financial literacy, financial freedom, and passive income. All of these wealth creation principles are the same no matter if you're in America, if you're in Australia, if you're in the UK. The first book that I read was a book written by Robert Kiyosaki, who's from Hawaii, based in the States. Second book that I read was My 4-Year-Old, the Property Investor, which was written by an Australian investor. So, I've read, books by investors or people who are in the financial and sort of personal finance framework from all across the globe. The principles are the same. So it doesn't matter where you are, as long as you have, eyes in your head and you're willing to read and to learn, the opportunities are there. It's just you have to reach out and grab them.
Rob, tell me how this has affected your mental health. You being your own boss, your investments, how does it affect your mental health? Knowing that whatever money you make,
Yeah.
you don't have to share it with anybody. You
You
put
know,
it in and
the
reinvest it.
the main thing is that security relieves stress. Money, generally speaking, is a stress to people. There are hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people across the globe hanging by a thread because of money, because they have financial problems, because their bills outweigh what they can take in. And that is something that I want to change. And it's not something that I can directly influence because there's too many. There's too many people across the globe who don't understand how to get themselves into a different situation. Where I would look to come in is to try and give them the tools to help themselves. The book that I'm going to be writing is called Financial Fish, and that's based on the principle that if you teach someone to fish, you feed them for a lifetime. But you just give them fish, then they eat for the day. Same principle as, like, yeah, the person who wins the lottery but is bankrupt, 2 years later because they don't understand the principles of what to do with the cash when they get it. It's the tools in order to build and create the security, because that's what money is. Money is just security. It's security that you can afford time for the things that matter. So in terms of my own mental health, I feel great. I'm doing what I love. I'm spending time with the people that I love, and that was always what my why was, if you like. I think when you are getting started on a journey like this, you want to start with the end in mind. You want to picture not only where you want to be in a year's time, you want to picture where you want to be when you are, 80 years old. What do you want life to look like? Do you want to have loads of grandkids? Do you want to just be you and the missus? Maybe you just want to be by yourself on a yacht in the Pacific somewhere. Doesn't really matter. It's whatever you want that vision to be. And then you start to point your compass towards that. For me, I was never interested in the yacht. I was never interested in the fancy sports car. What I was interested in is, a nice house in the country, a bit of space, animals round about me, because I kind of always liked horses, so it's great having horses now, and the kids can have horses if they want horses, and the kids have, if they decide that they want to, I don't know, go to France to learn French, then fine. It's the freedom to be able to facilitate those things. And I think having the freedom and having the security means that I don't have to stress about those things. And that then has the added benefit to, your mental health, and because it reduces the stress. Now, the thing is, life is full of ups and downs, like we spoke earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no such thing as a life without problems.
Right.
What you need to do is you just need to strive for a life with better problems.
Mm-hmm.
Money is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
If I am, broke and struggling to pay rent, that's a problem. But if I'm, a millionaire and I've got $1 million sitting in my bank account and inflation's at 10% and that money's just eroding away, I've got a different problem. Still a problem. It's just a better problem to
Mm-hmm.
have. So
Mm-hmm.
it's all about how you frame these things. But yeah, you will achieve your goals and then you'll realize that actually now I've got another series of problems that need to be solved. And so you'll set goals to try and overcome those, and you'll reach the far end of them and you'll realize, oh, I still have more problems to solve over here. They're just different problems. So it's all like there was a book called by Mark Manson. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this podcast or not. Maybe you can bleep me out, but it's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Okay.
I don't know if you've read it or not, but yeah, in the book, he has a character called Disappointment Panda, and Disappointment
Okay.
Panda basically says that all life is just an endless stream of problems, and you just have to get comfortable with the fact that if you solve this problem, there's going to be another problem waiting for you tomorrow. It's just a case of being comfortable with solving the problems. So yeah, that's kind of, as long as you are in a headspace where you're enjoying the problems that you're solving, or at least you're striving towards better problems, then that's, I think,
Mm-hmm.
happiness is a journey rather than a destination.
Where people are following your journey or want to learn more about you?
Well, we're kind of all over the place. So I'm on LinkedIn as Robert Rolston. My website is rolstonrealestate.org. Instagram is Rolston Real Est, short for estate, and so at Rolston Real Est. I'm on Twitter as Rolston Real Estate and Facebook as Rolston Real Estate as well. So you can kind of find me on all these platforms. And yeah, I would absolutely encourage anybody who is interested in financial literacy, interested in getting started with investing. It doesn't matter where on the globe you are, to reach out, get in touch. Even if it's just a case of following the content so that you learn something, or if you don't follow me, follow somebody else in that space. But it's a case of finding the information and absorbing it, and not only just listening to it, but also acting on it. Because even if you're only making small changes, those small changes accumulate over time. And like I said, my vision is for the average person, nothing special about me. The average person can achieve affluence. If I can do it, anybody can.
Thank you so much for coming to our podcast.
No
I
problem.
know
It's a
I've learned
privilege.
a lot.
No, privilege. Really, really happy. Thank you for having me.
We appreciate you, Rob. And your story isn't it's not about flashy success.
Right.
It's about being consistent, believing in what you do, being willing to learn, and whatever learning challenges that you have. What really impressed me, you started doing things on your own to make it better for yourself. So I really like that. And you took action. And that's what we're about on Thrive, making things happen.
I have a phrase for you. I just came up with. He had the drive to thrive. There
Yes,
you go.
you did.
You can steal it.
There you go. There you
That's
go.
free right
I like
there.
that. Yeah,
Yes.
He
yeah.
had the drive to thrive.
That's
Yeah. Because when we talk sometimes to the teenagers, it's like you don't have the energy. You're not trying to do something. They don't have the drive.
They don't have the drive.
But he had the drive to thrive.
Yes.
And look at what he is.
Yes. And look what you've accomplished
Yeah,
for
you
the
know what though?
security of your family.
Yeah, the thing is, why do people not have the drive? Right? You have to look at why this is. And it's because they don't think it's for them. They don't think it's possible. They don't see how can I possibly reach that from where I'm starting.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the thing, and this is why I try to share my story, because there's nothing special about me. I wasn't a brilliant scholar in school. I went through the whole of school before I even found out that I had dyslexia and why I struggled to study. I just had the willingness to go and try. And the thing is, right, don't look at Donald Trump or Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or somebody who's a multi-millionaire miles away up there, because that's not relevant. These people have hundreds of millions that they're throwing cash around. And the thing is, one of the things that I strongly believe is
not
that
my goal.
No, but you know what? There's a gap in the wealth that everybody talks about, and it's a gap between the rich and the poor, right? There's a gap in the wealth that people don't talk about, and that's the gap between the wealthy and the well off. And I call the well off is just people who are able to work, right? The people who are wealthy are surrounded by fund managers and asset managers and what's they call financial advisors, and people whose job it is to make these people more money because they have money to throw at it, right?
Right.
There's somebody who is just working away, has an okay job, and they've got a family and they're earning and they've got a little bit, but they don't know what to do with it. These fund managers and wealth creators, they don't want anything to do with these average people because it's not worth their time because they make the money off the fees of investing the kind of bigger accounts from these bigger, wealthier people. So that's why the wealthy people continue to retain and build wealth, whereas the average person struggles because they don't have the financial know-how to do it. And that's what I want to change. That's where businesses like mine come in, where we pass on that information, and if somebody's too busy to take it on, well, we'll do it for you. And that is how the people who sit in the middle start to become affluent and be able to build themselves into a better situation. It's the gap between the worker and the wealthy, as opposed to the gap between the rich and the poor. It's the gap that nobody's talking about, but it's the gap that there's people who have the ability to change their stars and just don't realize it.
That's good, Rob.
Well, again, thank you so much. You're welcome here when you finish that book.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'll let you know. Yeah.
And I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Rob.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate the chat.
Take care.
Cheers. Bye. Bye.
That's it for this episode of Thrive by the Rising News. Don't forget to follow us, rate our show, and share this episode with someone who needs that extra push.
Remember to follow us on all social media, all our platforms. We are at The Rising News. Remember, we're trying to get to 1,000 followers on YouTube. Help us do that. Also, remember that if you are experiencing a mental health crisis, please dial 988. But if it's a loved one who is experiencing the mental health crisis, dial 911 or take them to the nearest emergency room.
And if you think you're in a domestic violence relationship and need to talk to someone, please dial 800-799-7233 or text 887-888. Please make sure you're in a safe place when you're reaching out. And until next time,
don't forget to thrive. Have a blessed day.
Bye-bye.